Oh, very uncertain. Very uncertain. So many possibilities, but so much anxiety around all of them. And it's just very hard to know which road to take at what time. You know, I feel like I have a list of like 53 things that I want to do, which would all take like a year or two each. And just really overwhelming trying to figure out the order of those things for the best result. Which, like, what even is that? You know, I don't know what the best result is. No one knows that. So, you know, bit overwhelmed with the future. And I feel like even though I've only started my second degree just recently, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm trying to like put off making choices by like getting pieces of paper and qualifications and stuff like that in like a very formal structure, which I'm just a bit over. But very dangerous thought to have, I feel, because I don't want to end up having 7 gap years instead. And no one really knows what to tell you when you're 22, and you could go many different directions.
I feel a really strong combination of exhilaration and total confusion and fear. I think it's a bit of a cocktail. Starting with exhilaration, almost like what I said before, when I was younger and I thought, oh, what am I going to do when I'm 21? It's totally different to what I have done or who I am. And so that really excites me because, you know, that was only 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so I can't imagine what's ahead of me in those 3, 4, 5 years, which kind of ties into fear. And then I'm like, oh, but what if it's just a bit boring? You know, I think we all grow up with a sense that our life is going to be of some significance, whether to just ourselves or to the people we love or to a broader range of people. But like, what if my life is just not? What if my life's just a bit boring, you know? And what if in the next 5 years I look back and think, wow, I kind of just plodded along the same route. And maybe that's okay, and I think this is where the confusion comes in, because I'm like, what am I actually wanting with my life? You know, we always put the future into this really broad category, but I am the future. Like, I'm living my life now, so it's not like, what do I want to be when I grow up? It's what do I want to be now, because that's who I am going to be. And that's quite daunting, because I almost don't want that responsibility of having to choose who I want to be, because that just seems like an adult thing to do, and I don't feel quite adult yet, and I don't know when that happens, you know, when do I become an adult? So yeah, I think they're kind of the factors that play into it, but I feel really hopeful as well. I think when the future is this big abstract nothingness or everythingness, it can become so unattainable, or also like really unidentifiable, if that's a word, because we can't ground it in anything. But when I think about the things I'm really working for, the things I'm working towards, that for me is exciting, and that's really hopeful. And the things that actually give me meaning and purpose now, I know will carry on to the future. And so part of me feels like it's going to be okay, because these things that make me okay now will still be there in 5, 10, 15 years' time. I find it really hard to imagine life beyond 10 years. And I think climate anxiety is a real thing. You know, I was chatting to a friend who mentioned that to me. She's like, yeah, climate grief is a real problem now. And I actually really feel that. And I don't know, I think we grow up assuming that we want to have kids. Everyone assumes they want to have kids, but I don't know if I want to have kids, you know, because I don't know what world they're going to be growing up in, and that can sound so dramatic, and it can be like, wow, it's not going to change that quickly, but it is. You know, in the next 10 years we're going to really start seeing some ramifications for our actions, and that's just in like the climate, let alone everything else that will come from that. So yeah, I wouldn't say I feel hopeless, but at the same time I feel quite overwhelmed by the proximity of what's going to happen with climate change, particularly in Australia as well. It's really hard, because I don't want to just get into this rut of we're all fucked, but at the same time we are a bit fucked, and I can't see a way out of some of the things we've put in place, like whether that be severe drought, and we already are experiencing drought, but even more drought, or water conflict, or mass migration from countries that have gone underwater. And yeah, I don't really get it, because we still have so much corruption and so much evasiveness in our laws, and obviously there's so many other societal things that are happening that are quite frustrating too, but it all just gets amplified under a warming climate.
The future is actually so scary for me, and I was just talking to my mum about this. I was having a conversation about how the future is a subject that's coming up so much, obviously because we're constantly moving into the future, but the actual idea and concept of there being a future, because like I've obviously just, gotten into this new relationship, and it's my first actual relationship, and it's like, an adult relationship, so it's like, whatever that means, but it's like, we're talking about a future, and we're talking about plans in the future, and for the longest time, I'd never really thought about my future. As a kid, you kind of are just so much more in the now, and then as you get into a teenager, you start thinking about what I'm doing in the future, but when I was a teenager, I also struggled with like a lot of depression, and I for a long time just didn't even think I would have a future, because I didn't want to have a future in a sense. So now, and like being in this relationship, it's like unearthing a lot of like stuff that I hadn't actually processed about, like the concept of having a future, and kind of like thinking about that, because for so long I hadn't, and my mind was just, I guess, then wired in the sense of just not really thinking about it, and only really thinking, a few steps ahead instead of like years ahead, because I never really saw that for myself. And I guess in those years where you're kind of like, really growing, and your mind is kind of like, I don't know, getting structure, I just didn't think about that. So it's harder for me to think about now, but future is a scary thing. I'm trying to reinvent my relationship with that. It's a concept that I'm almost just now playing with at 22, properly, really thinking about what I actually really want to do. And I've never really known what I actually want to do. So I think that's also played a part in like the fear of the future, because I don't have structure around what that will look like.
I try not to think too much about the future, and my mind almost always takes me there. Like everything that I do, like I constantly feel the need to like understand it in the big picture. Like my mind works in such a huge scale that I always try to account for the future, and like if this action is going to affect my future in a helpful way or not. And I think that actually, even though I'm naturally inclined to doing that, it gives me more anxiety than it is useful. So like I'm quickly learning that. No, I'm slowly learning that I don't need to try and project too much into the future, because it is an abyss and everything can change. And I feel like I'm learning more to exist just in the present moment, of knowing that, I don't need to account for my entire life, because it gives me anxiety when I think about like, is this job going to help my future or not? And it's like, maybe it will, maybe, I don't know. I'm trying not to think too much about the future. Well, I feel like I can't separate it. That's the thing. It's like, as much as I also try to control my personal future, that interacts with society's future too. And like exactly what you were saying on the prompts, like who even knows, like why would I try to control my life when I don't even know if the world is going to exist? Or it's like there are so many different factors that could happen that thinking too much about it, just I can't. But I guess I haven't fully lost like meaning in my life, so I must have some kind of hope in the future and hope in the world, because I'm constantly, because if I didn't have any hope, then what would anything that I do matter right now? So I guess, I guess I'm in a hopeful spot and I'm trying not to think about it.
When